Hello and welcome to episode 38 of Creative Dynamos. Today I have with me Gray Rinehart. Gray and I have known each other through social media. I think we have some mutual friends for quite a while, and I had Gray on my previous, very short-lived, but possibly not dead, podcast on spirituality. Gray, how are you doing today?
Doing well, sir. Happy to be here, proud to serve.
Excellent. So, Gray, you are a multi-talented creator. You write nonfiction, fiction, music. How long have you been creating, and what started you down the road to be a creator, whether it was writing or music
Wow.
or
As
both?
long as I can remember, pretty much. I it's I know that I'm supposed to be a dynamo because you've invited dynamos. I noticed that some of my friends have been on, and are probably more dynamos in terms of their output than I am. Thinking of like Stuart Jaffe and folks like that. But I mean, I would write little story ideas and poetry things as far back as grade school and middle school that were terrible, as you might imagine. In high school, I guess it was either my junior year or senior year of high school, for some reason I took it upon myself every week after our football game, I wrote a poem that more or less encompassed something about the game that we played. And at the end of the season, kind of printed them off and put them all together, and everybody got a copy of it. Some people might actually remember that, but it was just silliness as far as that goes. Um, but poetry, I guess, was the first thing that I dabbled in before I started trying to write fiction. And it's funny that I kind of came back to it in terms of doing songwriting much later because originally I was just writing at the time some free verse, but mostly rhymed because that's just sort of I like to put the things into a structure and have them come out in a way that to me sort of has both rhythm and rhyme.
Mhm.
But I never thought of myself as musical, even though I liked to sing. So I never thought of making them into songs until much later. So that's probably how it got started. Um, the I tried to write short stories for a while in school, high school, and early college. I like so many of the things that I tried when I was very young. I wasn't immediately successful, so I stopped and I went on to the next thing. And I found more success in nonfiction early on. Um, and then came back to trying to write fiction much later and stuck with it long enough to actually see something happen with it.
At what point did you start to write fiction and kind of tackle that seriously?
That would have been late in my Air Force career. I remember about my fourth or fifth assignment, I kind of took a stab at, again, just said, I'm going to try to write a story. I hadn't done it in a long time. And I actually showed it to a fellow who I knew was interested in science fictional things. And he gave it back to me and said, "You know nothing about point of view." And I said, "What's that?" So he was right. I didn't know
Mhm.
point of view. I didn't know how to stay in a point of view, to follow a character along. And rather than letting that just destroy me, I sort of took that as a challenge to learn a little bit more about that. Later, when I was assigned to Thule Air Base in Greenland, there was not a lot to do in the off hours at Thule. The story was that if you went to Thule, you either came back a chunk, a hunk, or a lunk because you either spent all your time in the dining hall or you spent all your time in the gym, or you spent all your time just lazing around watching movies or something. Well, I actually learned the first little bit of playing guitar, and I wrote a novel. The novel never got published. It never went anywhere. I there's a story behind it, and I won't go into that unless you want to later. Um, but I realized that I could actually stick with a point of view and take a story from beginning to end, but I still didn't have the chops to get anything published until after I went to Orson Scott Card's literary boot camp. I actually had gone to his writing workshop in 2003, and then I got a chance to go to the literary boot camp the next year in 2004. I learned a lot there, but it was still several years after that before I had the first thing published.
What were those boot camps like?
Very interesting. At the first one, because I wanted to learn, I went down and sat in like the second row and was told that I had to move back because the first and second rows were reserved for those people who were going to the boot camp portion, and I was only there for the 2 day workshop.
Mhm.
And so, rather embarrassingly, I had to get up and move back. And I actually know some people who went to that boot camp, and I don't, maybe one of them actually sat in my seat. I don't know. But the first 2 days were very concentrated, sort of Scott laying out his storytelling philosophy, talking about, being able to fit the basics of a story onto a note card, and then doing some research. We actually had to go out and um, find story ideas, and the idea being that, you know if we are open to them, we can get ideas almost anywhere.
Yes,
Uh,
absolutely.
when I went back the next year, because it the boot camp portion was you had to submit a writing sample and be selected. So I wasn't selected in '03, and I was selected for '04. And the first 2 days were exactly the same in terms of, you know, the methodology and some of that. And then it was after that was you're going to write a story. Everybody's going to critique all the stories of everybody, and I think there were 16 maybe in our class. I don't remember exactly. Um, and so it was very much a once you had your story idea, now you had to execute that story, and then you had to share that story and get feedback from it. So it was a really good experience all in all.
Okay. That sounds like that would be a lot of fun to do. You mentioned your nonfiction. You recently, relatively recently, released a book called A Church More Like Christ, and you've also done a fair amount of fiction work. How do you approach writing fiction versus writing nonfiction?
Very stealthily. I have to kind of sneak up on it because it might run away. I might not catch it. Um, it's weird. I have these collections of notes that a weird thought will pop into my head, and I'll have to write that down. And every once in a while, I'll go and sort of look at them and try to put them together in ways that make sense, and mostly they don't, and so a lot of them don't go anywhere. And that's true both on the fiction side and the nonfiction side. I'll think of the opening of a scene and sort of jot it down. So and so is in line to get something, and somebody turns and asks this weird question or whatever. Same sort of thing with a nonfiction piece. I'll see something on the news, or I'll read something online and think, oh, that's an interesting little thing. What can I take that anywhere? More often on the fiction side, I have to figure out the a character who is doing something. And on in nonfiction, I could be just be talking to the wall, and talking to to an imaginary, classroom of people or something like that. But fiction doesn't really work like that. I have to put myself into the character who is living this situation. And for me, that is a very different kind of thing, and a more difficult exercise, because I can think of, here's this character who is the I'll use an example from my own life. Here's somebody who is a satellite operator in Colorado Springs, and they're on a shift taking care of the spacecraft. I can understand what that is like, but then I have to think of a situation that I'm going to put them in. There's a problem with the spacecraft, or there's a problem with the ground system, because there has to be something for them to do that's fairly interesting, or it possibly leads to a cascading series of things that they have to do. Nonfiction just isn't like that for me.
So, what was your inspiration for the church book? What brought that up as something
That
that you
was
wanted to
actually
do?
a walk I had with our dog Sierra back many years ago. I was taking the dog for a walk, and always walked by this particular church, and had gone to that church a couple of times. But at some point during that walk, I was thinking for some reason about churches and the money that they spend on themselves versus the money that they give to the world in terms of helping the poor, or helping people with expenses, or whatever that might happen to be, or running banks, or such like that. And the I think there had been a debate going on about whether churches should be taxed. And there were some people saying, especially looking at mega churches, that, oh, these churches should pay their fair share. And in a lot of cases, those churches are doing really good work. But I started thinking about, in some cases, not all, but in some cases, churches are spending more on themselves than they are doing much of anything else. And I thought, what if there was a church that established itself, said that this is how we are going to live. We are going to share more with the world than we spend on ourselves. Could that church survive? Could a church operate like that for any length of time? And could it attract people to hear the gospel because they see good works, and can glorify God? I believe that's in the Bible somewhere.
It
Could
is.
it maintain itself, or would it just dry up and blow away because it had expended all of its resources in the world? And even if it did, would that be a bad thing? I don't know. But that was the first thought. And then it became this idea of, could that sort of thing happen, and if so, how? And I began writing this charter for what I thought of as the gift, that the church would be a gift. The church would not exist to only take in gifts, but the church would take in gifts in order to bestow gifts. And then somewhere along the line, it I thought to myself, there's a scripture that says that if you are, and now I'm going to not even be able to remember it. Isn't that typical? That it is more blessed to give than it is to receive. And I thought, could that apply to the church as a whole, as opposed to individuals? That's a verse that I had always heard as applying to me and only me. And I thought, well, I don't know the Greek, so I don't know whether, there's some, because I know Greek has plural pronouns and it has singular pronouns, and where they are can make a difference. But suddenly I thought, if that possibly could apply to the group, the church, the corporate body, then maybe there are other scriptures that we hear that could apply to the church. And if so, what would that church look like? If a church could look at, say, the Lord's Prayer, which I did a long exposition of in the book, and how would it apply to the church for the church to say, we're going to forgive trespasses as others have trespassed against us? Again, I grew up thinking of that only in terms of my own life.
Sure.
Could it be something that could apply to the church as a whole? And that's how that book came about.
So how has that book been received?
I've had a lot of people express, I guess, pleasure with it, even though it's a nonfiction book, so it's really not supposed to be pleasurable, not like a story. But they've told me that they appreciated the 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 way it made them think about things, and that's a great thing, because that's really, it made me think, and if it makes other people think, then that's excellent. I've had a few people kind of say, I don't think you're quite on the right track here, and that's okay too, because
Mhm.
again, if it can generate some sort of discussion somewhere along the line, then I think that I will have achieved what I set out to do. And honestly, I haven't sold very many copies of it, and I don't know, if it'll ever catch on in that way. If it did, great. If not, that's okay. I priced it very, very low so that the entry point would not be very difficult for people. So it's out there for folks to pick up if they're interested. Um, I will say that I don't know if this was a mistake or not, but I put out a couple of Facebook ads, and you know that Facebook will show you ads for things that you never wanted to see ads for. Well, apparently it showed my ad for this book to some pretty dyed in the wool atheists
My,
who had not very pleasant comments on the ad itself.
sure.
and and I was able to actually engage them in a little bit of discussion along the way, which was okay. But I just thought, wow, what in the world had they clicked on at some point in the past that would have brought this into their, you know, perception at that time?
Sure. It's good that it garnered some reaction and some
Right.
conversation.
Well, the
Uh,
ad did. I doubt seriously any of them would pick up the book and actually read it, but
you never know. Like
that's true.
I have friends who are either not particularly religious or are atheists or are otherwise religious, and some of them have engaged with Christian. I think a lot of it has to do with is the book, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, does it come across as being preachy?
That makes a big, big difference. My novel from way back when, Walking on the Sea of Clouds, sort of split the difference, because on one hand, I had a reviewer pan the book because it was too Bible preachy. On the other hand, I had someone pan the book because it was not Christian enough.
Hmm,
So I figure if I'm somewhere in the middle of that, that's probably okay. Now,
probably.
the church book is legitimately about church. I mean, it's right there in the
Yeah.
title, and it's legitimately about the Christian church, but it's not a book of apologetics. It's not intended to make anyone who is not a Christian accept Christ and begin living as a Christian. It's really more for people who have been dissatisfied with their church experience and might appreciate a different way of thinking about some of the things that they have already gone through. So, but
It's
everyone's
on
mileage will
my
vary.
TBR, has been for a while. So
I know about TBRs. Yes, I have some behind me, and I have some over there, and
I've got a friend of mine that we go to the same church, and we get together probably once a month or every other month for donuts and coffee at a local place. And I think it would be a good book for us to read together. So that's
well, if you
definitely on
do,
my.
I would very much appreciate hearing how that goes. So,
You are definitely one for starting conversations on social media, but you're not
not
like.
always in the best way, but I try to be positive mostly.
I was gonna say, like, historically, I have a reputation amongst my friends of being a troll. I like to stir the pot. I find myself less enthusiastic about that the older I get. I just want to start good conversations. I don't want to necessarily make anybody upset or angry. Whereas that was not always the case. But I think in your case, most of the time it seems to come from a genuine place of wanting to have the conversation.
I
And I
do.
appreciate that.
I enjoy that, and I actually had a very brief exchange on Exeter, which is X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it these days. And it was a brief thing, but it was cordial and respectful, and that's the way I like it. I love to carry on conversations. I like to dig deeper into things if I can. I like to learn. So if there's somebody who is better informed about something than I am happy to sit and let them do the talking, and just to absorb what I can. Um, because I mean, I've done some weird things and thought some weird thoughts, but I know that I don't know much.
And that's valuable knowledge in and of itself. If more people could acknowledge that the things they don't know, the world would be a better place, or at least social media would be a better place.
There
Um,
is that.
so, speaking of your faith, I'm curious, and I know we had this conversation on my other podcast. How does your faith influence your creativity? What does it do? How does it work? How do you put
Well,
it to work?
it. I hate the phrase "it depends," but it depends.
It does depend.
A lot of it has to do with what is it that I'm working on at the time. When I wrote the novel, I the main character that I envisioned was someone who had been exposed to Christian beliefs and had rejected them, but then had ended up marrying someone who was a very devout person, and so there's some natural interpersonal friction there, and I didn't want to write the typical religious fiction thing where you know at the end somebody prays the prayer and all is sweetness and light, because life is just not like that. In other cases, I have written stories that had absolutely no, at least no conscious religious element to them. And I've written stories where there was a religious element because it just seemed like this character in this situation would naturally, like it was one that my story that was in Asimov's a couple of years ago, I guess, that was a finalist for the Ann Lab. Because of what was going on, that character naturally went to the little makeshift chapel to pray, to try to figure out what he should do. That was just natural for him to do that. Other stories I've done, that's not even part of it. The same goes for when I'm writing songs. You know, a lot of my music has nothing to do with faith. It has nothing to do with God. But then again, I like to express my faith through music as well. So, I will at times, like this past Christmas, I wrote a no kidding Christmas song because that was a way to express myself. Um, so it's always there, and it probably creeps in more than I think it does, either because I may have a character make an allusion to a scripture because that scripture is more or less a part of the language now, and that's natural for me to do. And even if perhaps I don't want that character to be overtly religious, I don't necessarily catch that because it is so natural. So it really does depend on what I'm trying to do at the time. Um, a while back, I was working on a fantasy novel that I still need to sort of break apart and restructure into something else. And that one I strictly built into the milieu of that story that it takes place where Christ has never been known. And so I'm dealing with people and their reactions to things in a way that's perhaps a little bit different because the structure of that fantasy world is so different from our own.
Okay. So second world fantasy.
Very much
Uh,
so. Yes.
okay. That's a term I'm showing off my new term. This is a term I learned fairly recently.
All right. I'll put it this way.
Um,
If you say so.
I read a book years ago about being a Christian and being an artist and how the author dealt with how the intersection between creativity and Christian faith has historically existed. And one of the things that I remember that author pointing out was the distinction of being a Christian author or a Christian songwriter in the sense of one who writes explicitly Christian art, poetry, songs, etc., is a fairly modern
Was
idea.
it Francis Schaeffer's book by any chance, was it?
It could have been. It's been so long since I've read it, I don't remember,
But I
but
think that's
that
a
wouldn't
very
surprise
good
me.
it's a very good distinction. And I would say that for the most part, I would not characterize myself as a Christian writer as much as I would a writer who is a Christian. Does that make sense?
I Oh, 100%. That's how I tend to think of myself. Like I write horror, I write science fiction, I write fantasy, I write some I won't even call it necessarily nonfiction so much as they're just like opinion pieces and stuff like that. And my faith intersects with those things in different ways. For instance, I had a book that I did it like a 5-day giveaway on Amazon of a book called Father Ian Mysteries, and he is one of my characters that I use to work out my own questions.
Yeah, you sent me the link to that. I don't do e-reader stuff, so I'm going to have to get the paper copy of that.
That'll be difficult because there isn't one yet, but
Well,
it's
then you need to get a paper copy ready so that I can get a paper copy.
I can do that. That's actually not the worst idea because I put it together. It's three short stories that I previously, two of them had been unpublished. One of them I published as ebook only, but with the three of them together, I think it's long enough that I could do I have a couple of print
So it's like
books
a
that I
chapbook.
yeah, I have a couple of print books that I sell that sell really well because they are short books and I can sell
Mhm.
them cheaply, and it's a good way for me to have something inexpensive to sell at my table. But yeah, so Father Ian he's the character I use to work through some of my own questions and issues. And so he's a good scapegoat. Not scapegoat's probably not the right word. He's a good tool for me to
He's a good
use to do that.
stand-in.
But yes, because he has a lot of the same questions and issues that I have. Imagine
Mhm.
that. Whereas I've got books like my Jenny Dare science fiction series where it's like Star Trek, like religion just never really comes up. And I think that's okay. not my first
Yeah,
novel.
if it
And I'm
doesn't serve
interested.
the needs of the story, then it's just going to be a distraction. And I don't think any of us should feel obligated to, to include it if it's not natural to the story.
I agree 100%. But there was when I first started writing, I was in a place where I felt very pressured by, I guess, the culture, the subculture that I was part of, the evangelical subculture. There's a lot of pressure to conform artistically to certain things. And yeah, I felt that pressure intensely. And my first novel which is nowhere to be found currently, and will probably remain such. It was very much fell very much into the Christian ghetto of fiction. But even then, I had a very good friend at the time. I still do it, although I haven't talked to him in a while. Who's a hardcore atheist, and I actually had him in the podcast version of the novel. I had him voice the character of the skeptic who was a police detective, and so he had to end up reading the whole story and wanted to, and he expressed that it was good because you didn't have to be of a particular faith inclination to read and enjoy the story. And that's what I try and do for all of my stories, especially the ones that are have a focus on faith. I don't
I
like to
think
limit my
that's a great
audience.
approach. Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about this novel that you mentioned that you haven't published yet. What's that
Oh,
about? And
not only haven't I published it, I haven't figured out how to make it publishable. But no, it was an idea that I wrestled with over a long period of time. Um, and as you say, it's a second world thing, and the world in this case is mostly ocean, and the populated areas are so far geographically separated that they have evolved differently. And if you imagine our globe and you have, say, Scandinavia and England, the Scandinavia and the British Isles up here, and you have New Zealand and a little bit of Australia down here, and nothing else. Maybe a few little islands here and there. Think about how long it took technologically for people to begin sailing across vast ocean different distances. And this will take place in sort of late bronze, early Iron Age cultures. But again, very, very different evolution. So the speciation even is the dominant species in the north is not the humans who are the dominant species in the south. And the idea is that eventually they're going to meet, and all of the things that come up with that. And what I did in the novel was I sort of wrote the story of how they come to know each other and how these folks travel down here, and it just was too much for one book. And so the advice I got, or the direction I got, if you will, was that I needed to chop this down. And so I'm looking at how I can just tell a story of these people down here, and then the other story, the first contact story, becomes sort of like volume two.
Mhm.
And yeah, it's been hard. And part of the difficulty of it was that I was working on this idea and had gotten about 60,000 words into it in 2019 when my wife passed away. And I could not even open the files for it until 2021, 2022, something like that.
Mhm.
Um, and because my evening walks with her had influenced so much of it. It was painful
Yeah.
to think of carrying this on. Um, but my new wife, who is very encouraging of all of my creative weirdness, and probably wishes I were more of a creative dynamo, as you as you have titled this. Um, Encouraged me to pick it back up and to try it again. And I was able to actually take the about the first 40,000 words of it and then write another 100 and it ended up being another 140 until I got to the end. And I knew it was too long for a standalone, because nobody's going to buy a 180,000 word novel from me. It's just too much. And so I knew that I needed to cut it down, but I couldn't figure out how. And one of these days, I will get the courage to open the thing up again and actually do something with it. It's another one of these that every once in a while I will make myself a note. I'll put it in my phone. I'll write it somewhere of, hey, if this happened, and it didn't actually attract the attention of the northern contingent, what else might be going on down here that I could actually make into an interesting story and have that stand on its own merits.
Mhm.
So I don't what else can I tell you?
It sounds like an interesting concept. It reminds me a little bit of Earthsea, which is a similar kind of geographic situation.
Into that, it's been a long time. My son and I read the few of the Earthsea books together, but I haven't thought of those in quite a while.
And it may not have that much in common, but I like the idea of exploring the effect that that kind of geography, which is radically different than the majority of our own geography, how much that would impact societies and cultures, and to your point, even evolution of the primary species. So that sounds like a really cool idea.
And I figure, in a fantasy, I can probably get away with it.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's the beautiful thing about writing speculative fiction is it gives us so much room to play
Yep, yep.
with ideas like that. So y- this kind of leads to my next question. How do you balance your creative projects? You're working on an album now for a charity, which I'd love to hear a little bit about. You've got these novels on the back burner. How do you decide how to? I think you're retired. You retired from the Air Force at least.
Yeah, I'm semi-retired. I still work in contract capacity for Baen Books, but I used to try to keep all the balls in the air at the same time, and I don't do that quite as much anymore. I don't know if it's because I've gotten older and I've gotten tired. I don't know if it's because I realized I'm really not coordinated enough to juggle, but of late it's been, I'm going to hold this ball in my hand and I'm going to work on this thing until it is done, even if it takes me a long, long time. The last story I wrote took me the better part of a year to write. It was not a very long story, but that was pretty much all I worked on, was that one piece of fiction. The album that you mentioned, LibertyCon, uh, convention in Chattanooga, Tennessee. I don't know if you've ever been.
No, I'd love to
Um,
go there because I love that part of Tennessee.
yeah, it's a small convention that used to be limited to 750, and a couple years ago they raised the limit to 1,000. 1,000 is the membership cap for
Mhm.
LibertyCon. Invited me many years ago to be the MC, and because I'm a weird person who does musical type stuff, I wrote a song. I wrote a folk song that talked about LibertyCon, and I did that during the opening ceremonies. And they brought me back the next year, not as the MC, just as a a guest, and I did that song again. And then the third time I went, I did a new song about the committee chairwoman, Brandy. And then the fourth year I went, I did another new song to the point where this past year, no, 2 years ago, Jody Lynn Nye, you may know who Jody Lynn Nye is, took me aside after I did my song and said, "You probably have enough of these to do an album, and you could sell it for the charity at the chair at and as part of the charity drive." And I thought, maybe, but rather than jump right into that, when I went back this year, I said, as I was introducing my latest LibertyCon specific song, which was the sixth one, I asked people, "Hey, Jody thought this might be a good idea. What do you think? How many people think, this might be a good idea?" And there's like 400 people in the room, and about maybe 250 of them raised their hand. Yeah, that's a fine idea, whatever. And so I said, okay, how many of you would be willing to bring an extra $20 to drop on this thing? And some of those hands went down, but there were still enough of them that were up that I thought, okay, I'm willing to make this a thing. So over the last part of last year, I wrote four more songs about LibertyCon, and in January went into the studio to record. Over the last month, kind of tweaked and got the recordings good. The cover art is in the process of being made, and pretty soon on the socials, especially on LibertyCon, there will be pre-orders available for LibertyCon's All Right for Fandom. And if you're at all an Elton John fan, you know exactly what tune that is using for that particular song. And it'll be 10 songs all about LibertyCon. I paid for the studio time. I'm going to pay for the reproduction of and packaging of the CDs. It's going to be limited release. Once they're gone, never to be done again. And every dollar that people spend to buy one will go to the charity that LibertyCon has selected.
Cool.
So I hope that it'll do well in terms of raising a lot of money for the charity. And, you know, that project is tailing off now. I'm in the final stages of that. And the next thing after we do the pre-orders will just be having them made and sent to me. So now I can try to turn my attention to some other things. I've got two songs that I've been working on that I'm trying to fit the chords to the words. The words are pretty much done. I think the lyrics are decent. Now I got to figure out how to how to translate the tune in my head into actual shapes that I can play. Not always easy because I'm not a great guitar player, and sometimes I'll struggle just to figure out what note it is because I don't read music. I it's one of the big regrets of my life is not working harder as a young person to do musical stuff. But once those are done, then I'll sort of turn my attention to something else. Maybe it'll be the novel, maybe it'll be an essay. I don't know, because I got some of those that have been cooking in the back of my mind for a while too. So for me, it's not a balance anymore like it used to be. It used to be, oh yeah, work on the novel for an hour. Now write a song. Now do this. I I just don't have the headspace for that anymore. I really have to do sort of one thing, and when it's done, then move on to the next. Long-winded answer. I apologize for that.
That's the best kind of answer on a podcast. You don't want short answers to questions usually. You mentioned, and I learned today, because I don't think I knew it before, that you are associated with Baen Books. You are the Slush Master General, I believe is the title that I saw.
Yes, that is true. It was originally just the Slush Master until a friend of mine, Alethea Contis. I don't know if you ever met Alethea.
I think so.
She's an author, delightful young lady, think of her kind of like a younger sister. She said, "Oh no, you work for Baen, therefore you must be the Slush Master General." And I was like, "I'm down for that." My official title is contributing editor because I am a contractor. But in my capacity as Slush Master, I read the unsolicited manuscripts that come in. Not very many come in physical form anymore, but a few still do. Most everything is electronic. I have a team of people that I can farm stuff out to, but I handle all the correspondence. I handle all of the I look at everything, at least in some respects, before we pass it on to the publisher or tell the authors thank you, but it's not a good fit for us.
Mhm.
So now I had
I
the opportunity as well to do some other things. For instance, we acquired a series of novels from a fellow by the name of Michael Merceau, and I had the privilege of doing the developmental edit of those. And that's been great. I've now edited 4 of his books. I love his work. And I've done copy editing and other kinds of things as well. Most recently, and again, this goes back to which of those balls am I holding in my hand and working on, has been an anthology. Uh, I'm co-editing with John Ringo in his Black Tide, excuse me, not the Black Tide Rising, in his Troy Rising universe. Black Tide Rising was done by him and Gary Poole, but we've collected some stories in the Troy Rising universe and submitted the manuscript for that just a couple weeks ago. So it's good for me. I get to do a lot of different things, and yeah, that's me. That's me and Baen.
I had the wonderful experience years ago of being part of a science fiction and fantasy magazine that some friends of mine and I started, and we ran that for a couple of years. And it's a huge responsibility to take these stories in that people have sweated over and are sending to the publisher to thumbs up or thumbs down. And it was a fun process of working with my fellow editors to decide which stories we were going to run, which stories we were going to reject. How has that process or that relationship with Baen affected your creativity and how they helped you creatively?
I like to think that I'm a little bit better at writing something that at least the opening of is clear enough that someone can tell what it is that's going on, and so it's not, they'll at least turn the page and get to the next few pages of it, because that's all we have time to look at usually is just a few pages of something. Um, and I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing, but I know it's because I am also a writer and submit things, and I want them to be not just to be accepted. I'd love them to be accepted, but I just want them to be treated well. I want somebody to give it a fair shake. I am determined that I'm going to treat our submissions that come into us the way I would like mine to be treated. Gee, I think I've heard that idea somewhere before too.
Yes.
Um, but part of it is also, I don't like for my time to be wasted. That's why I kind of apologize for giving a long answer. I don't want to waste your time. I don't want my time to be wasted. I don't want your listeners' time to be wasted. So when I read something from one of these people, I want it to be good. I want them to make my job hard, make it difficult for me to say no. Unfortunately, there aren't that many that make it that hard, either because I, I looked at one today or just a few days ago that was nonfiction.
Mm.
Okay. We don't publish very much in the way of nonfiction, and it's only been by people who are already associated with us and we knew what they were going to produce. So I sent back a note and said, I'm sorry, this is nonfiction. We don't publish that. It's all too we get books of poetry. We're unless it's just the most well put together epic poem, chances are we're not the house for you. We get sent children's stories. We get sent true crime. We get sent memoirs by people who have not looked at what we produce and have not read our guidelines. And yeah, I have to handle all of that, and it's just irritating in large respect because again, I pick up the thing and I want it to be good, and it bugs me that more of them are not good, that they don't really, make me pay attention, grab me and say, I am an interesting story and I'm well told. And it's so that's my approach to it. But the main thing that I think I have gleaned from it is, as I say, I think I can at least open a story in a way that someone will go, I'd like to know what's on the next page. I can continue that trend through every page, but it doesn't always work. That's the way things go.
I, I have to step on my soapbox for a moment based on what you've said and in agreement with what you said. When I was an editor for Flagship, our science fiction and fantasy magazine, the biggest irritation that we all shared on the editorial team was anytime somebody would submit a story that was clearly, egregiously outside of our submission guidelines.
Yep.
And so if you're an author and you're listening to this podcast, A, hit me up about becoming a guest on the podcast. But B, read the freaking submission guidelines.
Please.
Know your audience. Like we clearly have a PG-13 cap on our stories and we would get like erotica. Not to mention the fact that we didn't publish romance, even if it was not spicy. No, we were science fiction and fantasy and for a little while horror on the side. No, and then like little things like if they include layout and preferred font and etc. Follow that stuff to a T because what it tells the editor, if you don't follow that, is you're not going to be an easy person to work with because you don't follow very clear, very simple guidelines. And I only want to deal with people that are easy to deal with. If you can't respect our guidelines enough to follow them, then you're probably not going to respect my editorial response to your story if I even get that far. So, yeah, read the submission guidelines. If possible, read what they've published, see what you're getting into.
Yeah, there's a level of professionalism that you demonstrate when your submission is packaged well, and I don't mean in paper format or anything like that, but when it's at least a recognizable format and you've done at least the minimum of you've double spaced it and you've used a font that is not a very difficult font to read. You've actually paid attention to that, we want a synopsis and a completed manuscript. That, and I get so many of them where they'll send the manuscript, but they don't send the synopsis. And that hurts them because as I'm reading through the manuscript and I start to wonder, where is this story going? And is it worth my while to keep reading more? I'm going to turn to the synopsis that tells me the whole story. A cover blurb does not tell me the whole story. And if you don't send me a synopsis, I I'm stuck because maybe I'm on the cusp of wanting to read more, but maybe I know that I also have, ever how many hundred other manuscripts that I have to get through in a given, period of time. I think right now we probably have about 750 or 800 that we had not looked at yet. And I say that that's not really true. I've looked at them. But if they're science fiction and fantasy and they're novels, they're now waiting to be looked at in with some seriousness. The ones that are clearly not science fiction or fantasy, that are not novels, those I can winnow out pretty quickly, and usually those authors get responses within a week. At you know, if I'm keeping up, yeah, it just shows that you are respectful of the publisher if you can at least make an effort to include what we want in a format that's easy for us to use. So, all right, you were on the soapbox first. I jumped on it. We'll get off of that now.
Yeah, for sure. Let's
I've
see,
talked that you don't know where to go.
the you joked that you're not a creative dynamo, but you really are. Like you do so much and you wear so many hats. I'm impressed.
I guess it's just a difference of outlook, because I think of people like, I mean, you interviewed Stuart Jaffe, and Stuart, he is a dynamo because he cranks the stuff out over and
Mhm.
over and over again. He's got that whole production process wired, and he just does it. You interviewed Darren Kennedy, another friend of mine, great guy, and he has his process, and is able to produce consistently. And I can point to dozens of other people like that, and I am in awe of them. Partly because one of the weaknesses that I recognize in myself, I'm not a natural storyteller. I'm a much better wordsmith in terms of stringing words together and having them make sense at the end than I am a storyteller. I liken it to being, I'm more of a carpenter, a journeyman carpenter with language, but I'm not an architect. Or I don't feel like I'm a very skilled architect. So building the overall story is difficult for me. And that's where songwriting is kind of nice, because they're short. Even if I tried, I'm trying to include rhyme schemes, and I'm trying not to make every song sound the same, like I find that sometimes can happen. It's a different sort of thing. So I don't think of the dabbling in many ponds and many things as being a dynamo. I think of a dynamo as something that's just cranking out the power all the time. So that
Mhm.
was where my difference was. I will cop to being one of these weird people who is always trying to do something, and if it's not in here at the computer, it's outside, you know, building something, or what have you. Because that's another thing that I've just gotten into more and more is woodworking, and spending time that I probably used to spend in front of the computer, out, running stuff through the table saw, or turning stuff on the lathe, or what have you. Because again, it's a different mode of creativity. And I the world is such a fascinating place, and there are so many modes of creativity, and we don't get to live long enough to delve into all of them, but I'm trying to dip my toes into as many as I can. So if you consider that to be a dynamo, I will not gainsay you, but I just wanted to express my sort of difference in outlook on that.
I respect that. I admire both kinds. I admire my friend Paul Cooley. I admire Darren Kennedy. I admire Stuart Jaffe, who are just, they are cranking it out. They're just story machines, not in a bad way. Like all their stuff is very unique and different, and in some cases connected because they have series and whatnot. But, and then there's people like you and I who are multifaceted creators who have multiple, whether you consider them hobbies or business pursuits or whatever, where we're creating more than just stories. The thing about creativity for me is not as much about, and this is the theory of this podcast, is not as much about necessarily just being able to put out a lot of content, because there's a lot of people who put out a lot of content that I don't think are very creative. It's more like whatever you are passionate about creatively, and this is, consider this my submission guidelines for this podcast. If you're passionate about creating something, whether it's woodworking or filmmaking or writing or musician or music or whatever it may be, you inspire me as a creator, because seeing other people create, seeing what they create, learning about how they create gives me energy. And that's where I got this sort of creative dynamo idea from.
I like it.
Yeah, that's my mission statement, if you will. In terms, as you mentioned earlier, in terms of respecting time, I want to respect your time. We're coming up on an hour here. Tell people where we can find you, and yeah, if you've got anything that you want to plug that you haven't already, or even if you have, let us know.
My website is very simple. It's grayrinehart.com. I say it's simple. You obviously have to spell it right, and I
Yeah,
get many variations on the spelling, so people can look down in the corner and I'm sure you will make sure it's correct.
I'll
Um,
do my
but
best.
there you'll find links to everything. Obviously, I have an Amazon author page. My music is at grayrinehart.bandcamp.com, and that's where my three CDs of mostly science fiction and fantasy music are. Um, the new CD, which will not, however, be on there because it's only going to be available through LibertyCon. So uh, people can be on the lookout for that. Hopefully, within the next, I don't know when this will come up. So it may be that by the time you have published this podcast, people can go to the LibertyCon site and order it if they are of a mind to support the charity that way. I know I would appreciate it. I know they would appreciate it. So that's the big thing
Absolutely.
right now.
Awesome. Gray, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Scott. I appreciate it.